Why do Virgos distance themselves from their families? 5 psychological reasons that no one can explain. Everyone thinks that withdrawal is an act of anger. When they look at you and notice the silent space you've put between your life and your family, the first assumption is always that there was a fight, a scandal, one of those soap opera breakups full of shouting and slamming doors. But they don't understand. They don't understand why Virgos withdraw from their families. And the truth is that the 5 psychological reasons that nobody explains have nothing to do with hatred. Most of the time, your withdrawal is meticulous, it's surgical, and however strange it may seem to outsiders, it's a brutally silent survival mechanism. You don't wake up one day and simply decide to leave. The process begins years before you actually pack your bags or stop responding to messages in the family group chat. It begins in childhood, when you, with your mind that absorbs absolutely everything, began to map the invisible terrain of moods, unspoken expectations, and problems swept under the rug. You became the archivist of family dysfunctions. The first psychological reason that no one explains about Virgo's detachment is the overwhelming weight of being the emotional barometer of the house. From an early age, you realized you needed to anticipate chaos in order to control it. If your mother changed her tone of voice, you already knew you needed to clean the kitchen. If your father entered silently, you knew you should become invisible. You learned to read between the lines even before you learned to read books. And this comes at a high price. It costs you your own spontaneity. When you grow up feeling that the peace of the environment depends on your ability to micromanage everyone's mood, the family ceases to be a safe haven and becomes a full-time job. An exhausting, unpaid job where you never receive a fair performance evaluation. The detachment, then, is not a punishment you inflict on your parents or siblings. It's a resignation. You are simply quitting a position you never applied for. And that's where the second psychological reason for this silent abyss you've created comes in, the role of the fixer. Do you know that moment when the whole family is in crisis, and as if there were an invisible choreography, everyone turns their face towards you? They expect you to know what to do. They expect you to have the spreadsheet, the logical solution, the pragmatic advice that will save the day. And you do. You always do. The problem is that being useful has become your curse. The family has started to confuse your love with your usefulness. You wonder, in the sleepless nights, if they would call to see how you are if they didn't need a favor, a loan, or a magic solution to a problem they themselves created through sheer negligence. The Virgoan detachment stems from the exhaustion of being the structural support of a building that insists on collapsing. You realize that if you don't distance yourself, you will end up buried under the rubble of others' irresponsibility. You tried to warn them. You pointed out the cracks in the wall. You drew the map to avoid the disaster. But they preferred to ignore it, and this is where your cold, logical mind collapses. Which brings us to the point where the internal tension becomes unbearable and something needs to be done before you lose your sanity. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Wisdom That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Purposeful Life. Isn't a collection of predictions. It's a brutal and necessary mirror reflecting our almost unhealthy need to support other people's worlds until our own bones break. The book teaches you to map these invisible patterns of guilt and responsibility that family instills in our minds and gives you the silent permission you've always sought to simply let go. You're listening to this now, and I know your chest tightened because you recognize the weight. You know how much of your own peace you've sacrificed to avoid disappointing people who deep down don't even know your true essence. This discomfort you're feeling isn't wrong. It's your self-preservation instinct finally awakening. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, what was a responsibility that wasn't yours, but that your family placed on your shoulders since you were a child? And when you finally let go of that rope, the third psychological reason for your withdrawal becomes crystal clear. It's your total and absolute intolerance for willful ignorance. You are a sign ruled by Mercury. Information, analysis, and constant self-improvement are your love language. For you, to err is human, but to make the same mistake 20 times in a row, ignoring all evidence, advice, and warnings, is a personal offense. You distance yourself from your family because you can no longer bear to watch, from the sidelines, their endless cycle of self-sabotage. It's painful to see those you love making disastrous financial decisions, entering toxic relationships, or cultivating addictions, all while refusing any kind of real help. They want to complain, they want to vent, they want to dump the burden on you, but they refuse healing. They refuse the hard work of changing. And for a Virgo, hearing the same complaint for the 1,000th time, knowing that the person has the solution in their hands and chooses not to act, is a form of mental torture. You distance yourself to avoid going crazy. You cut off frequent contact to protect your own energy because their stagnation contaminates your need for evolution. You begin to feel drained, as if familiar inertia is pulling your feet down, back into an emotional swamp you fought so hard to escape. The need to create a sanctuary of order amidst chaos is the fourth invisible reason for this distancing. The environment in which you grew up was probably noisy, not necessarily physical noise, but constant emotional noise. Unnecessary dramas, cross-gossip, aunts' intrigues, passive-aggressive demands at Sunday lunch. Your mind, which already works at high speed, which already processes 10,000 scenarios per second, has no room for this family theater. When you finally move out on your own, or when you simply decide to close your bedroom door and not go out, you are building your temple of silence. You don't hate your family, you just love your peace in a much deeper way. Distancing yourself is the construction of a sanitary boundary. You need a place in the world where things are where you put them, where there are no emotional surprises lurking behind the door, where no one demands that you decipher effective riddles. By distancing yourself, you are not abandoning your roots. You are planting yourself in soil where you can finally breathe without apologizing. But this search for peace comes at a price, and it is precisely at this limit, at this border between protecting oneself and the fear of ultimate coldness, that the rope stretches to its maximum. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. And do you know why clarity is so essential now? Because the final step in this process is the most painful to accept. The fifth psychological reason that no one explains about Virgo's detachment is what we can call controlled amputation. This is the most difficult revelation. Sometimes your love for your family is so great, so demanding, and so focused on the potential of what they could be, that if you stay close, you will end up hating each and every one of them. Your critical gaze, which is your greatest tool, becomes a weapon against yourself and against them. You see all the flaws, all the excuses, all the mediocrity they accept for their own lives. If you continue in daily contact, you will become bitter. You will start to hurt with words. You will use your surgical observation skills to destroy their arguments. You know you have the ability to deconstruct the ego of any family member with 2 precise sentences. And you don't want to be that monster. You distance yourself to preserve the minimum of respect and affection that still remains. You create physical distance so that emotional distance doesn't turn into contempt. It is a profoundly misunderstood act of love. You prefer to love from afar, send thoughtful gifts on birthdays, and make short, polite visits, rather than stay and become the tormentor of your own home. It's logic applied to affection. If prolonged contact generates toxicity, reducing contact preserves the bond. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. Ultimately, it's all about preservation. The world already demands too much from your mental structure. Society already demands perfection, productivity, and constant problem-solving. When family becomes just another place of demands and exhaustion, your soul instinctively asks for space. Understanding why Virgos distance themselves from their families is understanding the anatomy of a sacred boundary. You haven't broken the bonds. You've simply reconfigured them into a format where you don't need to disappear for others to exist. This silence you've imposed isn't punishment. It's the sound of your own rescue. And while they wonder about your absence, focused on their wounded egos, you finally have the time and space to heal wounds they don't even know they caused. Your distance is, ultimately, your greatest and most silent personal victory, and it is at this exact point, where silence finally settles after the storm of separation, that a new and complex phase begins in the life of the Virgo. The dust settles and you are faced with the immensity of the space you have just created. Initially, this vacuum may seem frightening. After all, you have spent years, perhaps decades, functioning as the invisible pillar, the unofficial problem solver, the buffer against family crises. When you withdraw your energy from this chaotic ecosystem, the first sensation is not just relief, but a strange deconditioning. It's as if an engine running at maximum speed, overloaded, is suddenly switched off. Your body and mind take time to understand that the Cold War is over and that constant vigilance is no longer necessary. You wake up without having to anticipate what the next drama, the next indirect comment, the next manufactured emergency designed to suck your attention will be. And in this absolute silence, you finally begin to hear your own breathing. But make no mistake, the transition isn't without its ghosts. The Virgo mind, programmed to dissect everything down to the atom, will inevitably try to analyze its own decision. This is where the ghost of guilt comes in, a cunning shadow that society and even your own family will try to project onto you. The world out there loves the myth of the happy and unconditional family, and anyone who dares to break that script is quickly labeled cold, selfish, or ungrateful. And because you have an almost pathological sense of duty, some nights will be marked by questioning. Was I too harsh? Should I have tried one more time? Wasn't the communication failure also my fault? Your self-criticism, always relentless, will try to find loopholes in your own defense. However, it's vital that you understand. This guilt isn't yours. It's an externalized guilt, installed by a culture that romanticizes personal sacrifice in the name of blood ties. Your higher logic needs to intervene in these moments. You must remind yourself of the stark facts, the mental lists of accumulated disrespect, the empty promises, and the failed attempts to establish healthy boundaries that were summarily ignored. Empirical evidence proves that your withdrawal was not a whim, but an emergency measure. Over time, the absence of daily toxicity begins to work miracles on your physiology and performance. Virgos are ruled by Mercury, the planet of the mind, the nervous system, and efficiency. When your nervous system is no longer constantly bombarded by irrational emotional triggers and cheap manipulations from your family, your ability to focus reaches stratospheric levels. That immense energy you used to spend trying to fix people who didn't want to be fixed, trying to organize lives that loved their own chaos, is now entirely redirected towards your purposes. You begin to build your empire, whether professional, intellectual, or purely spiritual. Projects that were shelved due to exhaustion come to life. Your home, now an impenetrable sanctuary, reflects the order and harmony that have always inhabited your interior, but which were previously stained by external intrigues. You discover the indescribable pleasure of an untouched routine, of morning rituals that are not interrupted by phone calls laden with emotional blackmail. For the freed Virgo, solitude is not emptiness. It is a blank canvas where you finally have absolute control of the brush. And what happens to the family that's left behind? They will invariably follow their own cycles without your regulating presence, without your constructive criticism, which they called nagging, and without your forward-thinking planning, which they called control. Their house of cards may very well collapse. They will continue to enact the same dramas, make the same mistakes, and blame the same external forces because they lack the capacity for self-analysis that you possess in abundance. Occasionally, news will reach you through third parties, and you will notice something fascinating. Your heart will not race. Your mind will not begin to devise a 5-step rescue plan. You will only feel a compassionate neutrality, the same a doctor feels when reading the medical record of a patient who refused treatment. You understand the family's pathology, you see the broken gears, but you recognize that it is not your job to fix the world, especially when the world didn't ask to be fixed. This protected apathy is the definitive sign of your healing. From that moment on, your definition of love and human relationships undergoes a radical evolution. You stop accepting love as a genetic obligation and begin to see it as a construction of merit, respect, and mutual usefulness. The Virgo expresses affection through acts of service, a useful presence, and improving the lives of others. If your service is discarded, ridiculed, or demanded as an indisputable right, the source dries up. By distancing yourself from the biological family that didn't value you, you open space for building your chosen family. This is a very rigorous selection process, where places are very few and the requirements are extremely high. You will attract and keep close people who respect your need for space, who value your unwavering loyalty, and who are not intimidated by your surgical honesty. These people will understand that your love is not noisy or made of melodramatic declarations, but is made of the absolute certainty that you will be there, with a practical solution in hand when their world collapses. Your chosen family becomes a highly functional ecosystem filled with genuine affection, free from ancestral burdens. There is also a profound generational component to your detachment. By setting this ironclad boundary, you become the curse breaker of your lineage. Many of the dysfunctional dynamics that have drained you didn't begin with your parents. They were inherited from previous generations, an endless cycle of untreated traumas, swallowed resentments, and forced roles. When a Virgo says enough and refuses to participate in this pathological charade, they cut the umbilical cord of trauma. If you have or plan to have children, you're ensuring they don't grow up in this environment of constant tension. You are breaking the cycle. And if you choose not to have children, you are interrupting the transmission of pain in your own body, ensuring your legacy is one of peace and not blind repetition. It's an act of cosmic responsibility that your current family will never have the maturity to understand, but that the universe recognizes. Many will say you've become a cold person. They'll see your refusal to participate in tense Sunday lunches and your monosyllabic response to passive-aggressive provocations as signs of arrogance. Let them think what they will. The opinion of those who don't contribute to your peace of mind is absolutely irrelevant to your survival. The truth that pulsates within you is that your coldness is the warmest and most protective shield you've ever forged for your own heart. It's the barrier that prevents your extreme sensitivity. Yes, because beneath all that analytical armor, Virgos are deeply sensitive, from being crushed by the ignorance of others. You haven't closed yourself off from the world. You've simply closed the doors and windows to the toxic dust, allowing only sunlight and fresh air to enter your inner sanctuary. And as the years pass and the distance crystallizes into a new normal, you realize the true magnitude of what you have achieved. You haven't just survived your family, you've transcended the need for their approval. You've stopped trying to translate your complexity, your perfectionism, and your worldview to people who don't speak the language of continuous growth. You've accepted the majestic solitude of being who you are. Your mind, once a battlefield of unmet expectations, becomes an ordered garden, where every thought, every plan, and every emotion has its designated place and clear purpose. The absence of constant family dramas frees up an immeasurable amount of bandwidth in your brain. You begin to notice details of the world that previously went unnoticed because you were too busy defending yourself. The quality of your sleep improves, your digestion, always the weak point of a Virgo when stressed, regulates, and the constant tension in your shoulders disappears. You learn that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the ability to choose which conflicts are worth your energy. And fights over wounded pride and old family squabbles definitely don't pass your rigorous quality control. You begin to invest in yourself with the same obsessive dedication you previously used to try to improve others. You discover that you are your own best company, your own wisest advice. The strategic isolation you implemented was not an escape from reality, but a deep dive into the most fundamental reality of all. You were born alone, you will die alone. And in the interval between these two events, your primary duty is to protect the integrity of your own soul. Society may continue to preach that blood is thicker than water, but you have learned, through pain and raw analysis, that what speaks loudest is peace of mind. And your peace of mind, hard-won through conscious detachment, is priceless, non-negotiable, and not subject to review by those who never knew the value of what they had when you were there. You are living proof that sometimes the highest form of self-love is knowing exactly when to leave, closing the door carefully and never looking back. And on this solitary journey towards your own uninterrupted excellence, you discover that you haven't lost a family, you won yourself back.